Hey everyone, this is a VoD review of Optic versus TSM. I'm John Valentine, and let's get into it. So, looking at the way these team comps are kind of shaking out, Optic's team comp really can't afford to fall behind. They have these three really powerful winning lanes that they are really going to be looking to pressure and take advantage of in the early game, and that will provide them a lot of control over the map in the early game if they play their cards right, which should let them snowball to an insurmountable advantage because the pressure on all three areas of the map do make it very difficult for TSM and for Acadian to be able to make much of anything happen and be able to kind of get any sort of control over the map. However, if Optic should fall behind, their 1-3-1 is kind of significantly weaker. Yes, they have this really powerful Aurelia Vladimir matchup, which they can leverage to a really great effect. But the LeBlanc into the Corki, yes, it is strong in the early levels, but eventually the Corki gets to a point where he can just shove out waves, and LeBlanc can either clear the waves and maintain pressure in pushing the wave, or she can have kill threat on Corki. She can't do both because all of her offensive abilities she has to burn to clear waves, which make it really difficult for LeBlanc to actually have significant pressure onto a Corki in a later game 1-3-1. On top of that, the Draven is just straight up not going to be as impactful as the Ezreal in 1-3-1 in the mid game or in any sort of late game exchange. So Draven especially, but most of the Optic lineup is going to be really dependent on getting ahead early. Compare that to the TSM lineup, which has really great scaling in all three of their lanes. Yes, they're very, very weak early, and that is really the time period when Optic is going to have to be pushing advantages. But as the game goes on, TSM is going to get stronger and stronger. They will continue to lose in a 4-1 situation where Broken Blade just kind of continually falls behind Dokla. However, if they get the 1-3-1, it's fine for them. It's not the end of the world because of how well the Corki can kind of survive that, and because the Galio can ult in to counter out any sort of similar ult in from the Tahm Kench. And again, the Ezreal is just going to be more impactful in the mid lane, especially as the game goes on, than the Draven will really be able to be. So that being said, I really dislike Optic's choice of bottom lane here. I think I didn't see the bans. If Kalista or Lucian was available, it would, I think, fit into this a little bit better because you lose a good chunk of your ability to capture and force around the Baron Pit by choosing Draven. On top of that, the Draven Tahm Kench dyssynergy is very significant. Draven as a champion is incredibly dependent on winning the laning phase. He really, really needs to be able to shut down his opponent and not let his opponent get a significant amount of gold, and leverage his passive and leverage his really powerful early laning phase to get and maintain a significant gold lead over his opponent in order to be more relevant than them as the game goes on. Tahm Kench is completely counter to that. Tahm Kench is a disengaged champion whose prime focus, I'll pause right here, whose prime focus is to survive the laning phase so that he can be very effective in mid-game skirmishes and late-game teamfights and within the 1-3-1, which makes it very difficult for Draven to get those advantages. Yes, TSM picked two very weak bottom laning bot laners, but a champion like a Thresh or an Alistar or simply any more aggressive support than the Tahm Kench would have really given Optic the opportunity to dive bottom lane more aggressively, to force Sven away from the minion wave more aggressively, and actually take advantage of that early Draven power that the champion does kind of depend on. Add on to that the Kleptomancy Draven, which I don't know where this came from. Maybe somebody in LCK picked it at some point, but I really dislike it. It comes across as a way to kind of get Draven through his weak points later into the game. I think the basic idea is Draven as a champion is very dependent on winning the laning phase. So the idea behind Kleptomancy is that if you take the Klepto, you are not as dependent on shoving out your opponent because you are getting some sort of gold advantage from having the Kleptomancy instead. However, Ezreal is also a Kleptomancy champion. By taking the Kleptomancy, you give yourself a much harder time winning the lane because you're sacrificing a lot of laning power that you would otherwise have from a different rune. And on top of that, part of the reason that Draven is really, really strong is he has the ability to shut down the opposing bot lane. If he can lower the amount of gold the enemy bot lane is generating, that really benefits a team composition such as Optics that's trying to shut down TSM and gain advantages on the map to pressure down turrets in the early and early mid game. Having this double Klepti bot lane really accelerates both teams towards the late game, right? Having more gold in the game accelerates scaling, is better for the scaling team, is better for the team that is behind. So putting your bot lane into a position where you're saying, okay, I will not be as aggressive with this Draven, and I will instead generate a bit more gold through the Kleptomancy. It's kind of handshaking with your opponent, saying, okay, we're both going to farm up and scale when you are playing a early game aggressive champion and they are playing a defensive laning champion who wants to scale. And that is, honestly, it's playing directly into TSM's hand. However, moving beyond the Draven pick, we have a play in the mid lane. We're seeing that kind of early pressure that LeBlanc should be able to have onto the Corki, and we're also seeing Crown kind of give that up completely. Let's back up a little bit here and we can see how this play unfolds. But so coming into this play, Crown is up a significant amount of mana. Crown is up a charge on the Corrupting Pot, although Bjergsen has one ticking right now, so that's not necessarily strictly true. Crown has the minion dematerializers coming up soon, which mean that he will be able to push in Bjergsen even more to help deny the Bjergsen TP. And Crown is ultimately in a really good spot to finish clear out these 3 caster minions, let the 3 of the caster minions he has up crash into the turret and die. The lane will reset, and then Crown can really bully Bjergsen pretty significantly out of this matchup and use the better push that he has from the dematerializers that are coming up to stop him from being able to safely recall and teleport back without losing a significant chunk of CS, or at least some amount of CS and some turret plating. Instead, Crown sees what he thinks is an opportunity for a dive. He arguably should wait for the corrupting potion on Bjergsen to wear off. Goes just way too aggressively, dives. There's a world in which Bjergsen also flashes away and lives there. There is a world in which Crown just backs off, as I mentioned. But anyway, Crown goes too aggressively, dies first, and basically concedes all of that mid lane advantage that, again, Optic is really dependent on all 3 of their lanes winning. And if you have Crown making plays like this, which then allow Bjergsen to teleport back, shove out the wave, deny Crown a bunch of CS, really putting your mid lane behind, and taking this this powerful 3 winning lanes team comp and then seeding one of those lanes by making an over aggressive move is probably one of the worst things you can be doing. Now you're looking at the map. Bjergsen is now shoving in. Dardoch now cannot aggressively invade into the TSM bot side jungle, which they really want to be doing to pressure this bot lane, because Bjergsen has priority mid. And already the early game is really not going Optic's way. This mid lane play really strongly benefits TSM over Optic, and bot lane not getting the kind of lead they were looking for because it is a Tahm Kench, it is a Kleptomancy Draven. Top lane is starting to pull ahead. We see Broken Blade forced to recall before Dokla. But all in all, Optic is not getting what they need to be getting out of this game so far. There is still plenty of time. We are very early in the game, and we do see them picking up turret plates, and Broken Blade losing a bit of CS in the top lane, and Crown finally getting that push back onto Bjergsen. But we're not seeing Dardoch contesting the red side jungle as much. He does make his way in here, and this is really kind of exactly what I want to be seeing out of Optic now that they've regained that pressure mid, is Crown going into the Fog of War. Basically, he doesn't even need to walk all the way bot, he just needs to go into the Fog of War, and that threatens the dive onto TSM. forces Acadian to just kind of sit around in the bot side here, and it's really rough for and difficult for TSM to do much about that. We're seeing now Optic actually playing towards their bot lane strength, and that's really what we want to be seeing, and we want to see them continue to do that. Right here, we do see, I want to point out there was an Optic ping onto Acadian farming the Krugs. So they do know that that is where Acadian is, and Dardoch right now is stealing away the Raptors because he does have now priority mid and priority bot. Tom Kench is in the jungle, so he can do that safely. They spot out Acadian again as he walks up towards those Raptors. And we're about to get to what is ultimately a really poor play from Dokla. He's getting when he knows that Acadian is on the bot side, he to some extent allows himself to get shoved in. He can't contest that shove to some extent because there is such a huge minion wave that he's unable to make any sort of engage on a Broken Blade. But Dokla should know. They saw the Krugs. They pinged that Acadian was on the Krugs. They saw Acadian at the Raptors, and they knew that Dardoch had taken those Raptors. So if you're Optic and you see that this happens, you need to know that Acadian has no camps on the bottom side of the map that he can be taking. You know that Crown is backing off of mid lane to go towards blue buff. You know that bot lane is recalling. So the only things that Acadian can be doing are rotating top lane, clearing out top, and then trying to possibly make a gank, or just recalling. And looking at the items, he doesn't really have that much gold to be recalling onto. So Acadian is to some extent priced into making this top lane gank, and Dokla really should know that that is the case and not be aggressively engaging onto Broken Blade right when Acadian is expected to be topside. That's really poor play out of Dokla, and it is really TSM or Optic continuing to make mistakes and give up the map pressure that their team composition is so incredibly dependent on. I want to talk about TSM for a second here, because this is a team that throughout the split has really shown that their biggest strength is lane dominance. They have most of their games involve them getting a significant lead in the laning phase, and then showing that their mid and late game decision making can be very questionable at times, and they have lost a few games. Most immediately, they lost to Cloud9 because their late game decision making was really just not up to par, even though they had such a massive lead. So I'm almost happy to see TSM, especially against some of the lower tier LCS teams. I'm really happy to see TSM picking these scaling compositions, because it to some extent forces them to, even if you get a lead in the laning phase, you still have to actually play as if you're on even footing for a good chunk of the mid game, because they are going to be more powerful than you, and you are going to have to actually make solid mid game and late game decisions to actually close out those games. So to some extent, it's TSM not playing to their strengths, but forcing them to learn how to overcome some of their weaknesses. And I'm actually pretty happy to see that out of a team that is looking to be pretty much locked for third place. So I'm happy to see them using these opportunities to practice things they're less good at. Continuing forward, we're going to see Optic is now to some extent starting to play as if they are behind. We're seeing Dardoch is now staying pretty much exclusively on his own side of the map. And yes, he is technically on a scaling jungler into the Jarvan matchup, but his lanes are still to some extent head. He does still have free winning lanes, even though these early kills have kind of come across for TSM. And we really want to be seeing Dardoch aggressively pushing those advantages. Yes, you don't have as much of an advantage as you had earlier before Dokla messed up top lane and Crown messed up mid lane, but you do still have the early advantage. The game still has not progressed to a point where TSM has scaled by any extent. Optic's champions are strictly more powerful than TSM's in pretty much every lane. So seeing Dardoch so afraid and so unwilling to push into the TSM jungle when they do have these leads is really, really disappointing for Optic. spots out Acadian here, and he's just gonna back right off, accomplish nothing. Game is going to extend, and you can see Big is actually Big to some extent realizes what should be going on. He does move into the TSM jungle, doesn't accomplish really much at all. Spots out Acadian again, which does provide Dokla the opportunity to go aggressive here. However, he had the opportunity earlier when Dardoch spotted out Acadian, so Big's maneuver into the jungle, while a step in the right direction, isn't necessarily a step far enough. Big here is going to take a recall, which is acceptable. It's not ideal. For Optic, if Optic had recognized that Acadian was on a recall, then it would have been a pretty clear choice for them to move on, for them to not have Big recall, instead move on to the Mountain Drake. And it's quite possible they should have known that. They saw Acadian at the Raptors and then saw him again by the red buff, so it should have been fairly easy for Optic to kind of time, okay, these camps are all down, Acadian is either has to recall or move top lane. Recalls and moves top lane, Dokla is not prepared for it, but Optic could have timed that better, could have taken this Mountain Drake a bit earlier if they had done a better job at kind of figuring out where Acadian could be. And Dokla could have been not so forward in the lane if, again, Optic had done a better job of kind of reading the map and figuring out where Acadian could realistically be at that point. Really disappointing from Optic. We saw earlier them kind of showing to some extent that they had an idea of how to play this. I do actually really like this move from Crown here. TSM kind of makes the call for KD and go top. It's pretty much TSM saying, okay, we're going to trade top lane pressure and maybe a turret plate or two for the Mountain Drake. That's kind of really basic. It's a really basic thing to do here, especially when your bottom lane is behind like this. And TSM basically reads this as, okay, we're making this pressure and objective trade, so now we get to stay top lane and push down this objective while they take the Dragon Pit, but Crown says, no, I'm not actually going to be with my team at the Dragon Pit, I'm going to come top. And Crown is kind of really able to shut down that TSM trade. It's really, really good for Optic to see that. Because Optic should, at this point, know how do TSM come into this game? How do TSM get this game into a point where they are capable of playing League of Legends? And to some extent, they're already there. Optic has completely stopped pressing the advantages in their lanes. They've completely failed to get any real vision past the river. They have 2 wards in TSM's jungle from the dragon play, but those kind of stop being as relevant once the dragon goes down. And Optic will seed a free Rift Herald, which is something that they really shouldn't be doing. They have this really powerful matchup in the top lane. They have a significantly stronger 2 versus 2 in both top and mid. And once the dragon goes down, they should, especially after the top lane play when Crown is able to kill Broken Blade, Optic should immediately be looking to, okay, how can we move this mid and top lane pressure into controlling the Rift Herald? Because that is kind of the clear logical next step after you take down the dragon, is to move towards Rift Herald, as we are in that 12 or so minute range when the Rift Herald becomes a real objective. They fail to do that. Instead, rotate Dokla to mid lane and lose the Rift Herald for free. Rotate the lanes back to get the Aurelia back into this kind of highly favorable matchup that she is building pretty much exclusively for. And the map resets. Dardoch makes another move into the TSM jungle. Doesn't stay because he decides it's time to give Crown blue buff. As a result, because Dardoch was spotted out, Acadian is able to move into the Optic jungle, and Dardoch lets this happen. Walks right back into his own jungle because he doesn't realize that TSM is intelligent and capable of seeing when Dardoch invades and counter out that play. Really, there have been some very questionable movements from Dardoch this game. They had pressure bot. If Crown had been willing to not get blue buff yet and follow Dardoch into the red side jungle, Dardoch could have taken the blue buff, the TSM blue buff, and turned that pressure into a possible dive onto the bot lane, which would have really punished Acadian for trying to counter the invade by moving into the Optic red buff Optic chooses not to make that play, chooses to just back off. It seems their only goal with their early game power was to take turret plates and try and convert that into some sort of strength in the mid game, but even that isn't working out for them because of the few messed up plays, and you gotta really start questioning what Optic is expecting to get out of their team composition. Yes, they have this really powerful 4-1 if they can force TSM to do that, but they've completely failed so far to take advantage of their 3 winning lanes, and as a result, TSM is still in this game. TSM is, or not only in this game, TSM is winning this game. So Optic, again, walk into the shallow parts of the TSM red side jungle, place some minor vision there, but they do it at a time when Crown is on a recall. Dardoch's just about to recall, so TSM has a very easy time just kind of coming in and clearing out that vision. Optic need to be pushing their advantages. Optic need to be coming in fresh, shove out the waves, walk into the TSM jungle, clear out all of the TSM vision, place control wards of their own, and say, your move TSM, you're not allowed to enter this side of the map. We are going to take bot lane turret, and if you try and stop us, we will dive you, or catch you in the rotation. We will take mid lane turret, and if you try to stop us, we will dive you or catch you in the rotation. And not give TSM an option to counter out that play, because Optic is so much stronger at this stage of the game. However, Optic now reads, okay, we've lost the first turret, we're down a kill, we don't have significant CS leads in our mid and bot lane, I guess we're behind now. And Optic is, and has been for a few minutes, been very visibly playing like they are behind. Yes, they've been shoving out top lane and bottom lane when they have been able to easily, but they haven't been able to get that aggressive vision into the TSM jungle. They haven't been tracking Acadian in a meaningful way that would allow them to take advantage of this huge vision advantage that they should be getting because of their pushing lanes. And Optic are, and Dardoch is just staying completely back. He's basically trying to farm up for late game on a team composition that can't really contest TSM in the late game. Yes, there was a world in which Crown is able to chunk out 2 members of TSM and make it a favorable fight for Optic, but that's not a realistic game plan. That's not a viable strategy to try and play for that. Optic really should and really needs to be aggressively controlling the map and aggressively pushing past the river, and they just aren't doing that. Optic now moving into the 1-3-1 now that they've taken both of the side lane turrets. This is pretty much as to be expected. I would almost prefer Dokla to be going bottom lane, because the Baron is coming up in 1 minute and Crown doesn't have the teleport, and Crown also doesn't necessarily win the matchup against the Vladimir. But moving into the 1-3-1 is, to some extent, a negative for Optic, right? In this Corki versus LeBlanc matchup, they are disadvantaged in the 1-3-1, especially because it's a TP advantage on Corki. Looking at the 4-1, which is much more favorable to Optic, they're able to more aggressively push the Aurelia forward because they can use the LeBlanc's dive threat onto the mid lane or onto the bot lane if that's where the 4 is. It shouldn't be, but still. But Optic is going to opt into the TSM favored 1-3-1. Maybe they're thinking, we have Tahm Kench, so we're better at 1-3-1. No, that's not how it works. They're going to be unable to have any pressure onto the mid lane. They're going to be unable to have any pressure onto the bot lane. Yes, they have pressure top, but you're now at a point in the game where the Draven should be at a strong point, and he is now basically losing because he's not being able to pressure it at all. Dardoch is placing defensive vision rather than trying to be aggressive in any way. And Dokla is kind of alone on his team and saying, hey guys, we are still stronger than them, even though the early game didn't go necessarily as planned. And Dokla is the only one who is actually trying to aggressively push up and take any sort of advantage. However, due to the lack of presence in the mid lane and lack of presence in the jungle for Optic, Dokla cannot do this on his own. This is a team game. He needs, in order to pressure it all, Optic all need to be playing the same game of League of Legends. And right now, Dokla is playing, I'm winning this lane, I want to play aggressive, which is how all of Optic should be playing. But the rest of Optic is saying, we are behind, we are losing this game, we need to play defensive because we have limited vision and bad control of the map. See, great example of that. Again, all of Optic is playing back, they have no forward vision, and Dokla is playing forward. Really poor miscommunication from Optic, really kind of questionable from Dokla. Yes, that is, playing forward is what Dokla and Optic want to be doing, but Dokla should, again, you should realize that's not what his team is doing. That's not what's actually happening, so he can't pretend that that is how his team is playing. Crown going to come in, get taunted. Great time for the LeBlanc. This really is, it's really a shame for Optic when the only pressure you can get onto any of the lanes is when Acadian has just committed topside and Broken Blade and Bjergsen are on a recall. And even then, they aren't even able to get the minion wave really into the tower. It's really rough for Optic at this point. And it's a shame because we are still at a point in the game where Optic's champions are more powerful, right? This LeBlanc still has an awful lot of threat onto the Ezreal. The Draven is on his 2-item spike. Yes, he just bought a QSS for God knows what CC on TSM side. But the Draven is still putting out solid chunks of damage onto the currently squishier members of TSM. And for a moment, Optic makes an aggressive play. TSM, I think, gets to some extent baited into thinking, okay, we're ahead because of how defensive and how kind of meek Optic has been so far this game. The TSM says, okay, we can make an aggressive play onto this Drake. We can take a team fight. We have better defensive vision. They don't have much forward vision, but they shouldn't at this point anyway. And yes, TSM is ahead in terms of, moving into this play, is ahead in terms of we are doing a better job of accomplishing what our team composition wants to do than they are. But their champions are still weaker for another few minutes until they're able to complete a few more items. So TSM kind of baits themselves into a bad fight, lose the fight, because, and lose the Baron as a result. There are some trade kills at the end, that's not particularly relevant. This is pretty much exactly what Optic wanted. This is pretty much their only real way back into this game is if TSM hands them a fight before they have a chance to outscale. And TSM pretty much allows this to happen. They take the aggressive play, they teleport in even after Broken Blade has been chunked out and is no longer allowed to be a part of this fight. And Optic just kind of runs away with it, gets a bunch of kills, going to get the Baron, which finally puts the map back into a position where Optic has the pressure. With the Baron buff, they can shove out these waves much more aggressively. It helps, especially LeBlanc in the 1v1 matchup, because it stops Corki from being able to shove out the waves as hard. And getting this Baron really is pumping life back into Optic's chances at winning this game. However, they still are not pushing forward into the TSM jungle. They still are therefore unable to track the members of TSM effectively and get the lane assignments they want when they want them. And they are therefore unable to push very far into this mid lane and even pressure this mid lane outer turret to any significant extent. We are at a stage of the game where Optic are still stronger, and they should be able to pressure into TSM's jungle much more aggressively than they are. However, they are kind of choosing not to do that. Right here, we're going to see almost the opposite play of Optic starts the Drake. TSM says, okay, we can fight this. Is kind of an instant replay of the last time. However, this time, TSM has teleport advantage because Crown Broken Blade was in the fight to begin with, and Optic completely misreads this. They take this fight that they should not have taken, knowing that there is a teleport advantage on TSM. And look at the map going into this fight. Optic knows TSM is here, knows where TSM are. They also know that top lane is pushing in, Dokla has Baron buff on him, and that Dokla doesn't have teleport. So what Optic could be doing when this happens is Big can flash this wall, and Arrow can throw his stand aside into TSM, and Optic can just walk away. TSM can then make a move on the Drake. Optic can contest it with Crown jumping over this wall to aggressively poke down TSM, and basically try and get to a point where you can force Broken Blade to teleport in without actually committing to a team fight. You have the Sejuani ultimate to disengage, you have the Tahm Kench Devour to pull people out when they are in trouble, and you have the LeBlanc poke to pressure onto TSM without committing to a fight. So once they're able to force out Broken Blade's teleport without actually committing to a fight, they can disengage, and Aurelia can take objectives. This is how you want to be playing split push. Optic instead, so Big does flash the wall, but Optic re-engages. There's no reason they need to aggressively re-engage like this. It's okay to lose a Mountain Drake. It shouldn't be impactful in this game. And yeah, they get top lane turret and trade, but even then, this is just it's too aggressive from Optic. They're not taking advantages when they can be. They're not getting that forward vision that they really are dependent on. And they're taking aggressive fights and making aggressive plays at the times when they shouldn't be, and failing to take aggressive plays at the times when they should be. It's really questionable from Optic, and fortunately there are some really obvious mistakes that they've been making, not tracking Acadian particularly well, not moving into the TSM jungle, and these are things that are coachable, these are things that you can practice and things that you can work on. But at the same time, there's been this kind of serious communication issues between Dokla and the rest of the team. They have not been really on the same page, with Dokla playing aggressively and the rest of Optic playing back. And they've done a very poor job of reading the state of the map, done a very poor job of knowing when they were ahead and when they were behind and playing accordingly. And that's more difficult to work out. Communication issues are the bane of any team, and it's beyond strategy. That's just straight up teamwork, and that's really the difference between a quote-unquote good team and a bad team. And seeing Dokla kind of fail to communicate with Optic effectively, seeing the rest of Optic fail to communicate to Dardoch that they are ahead, it's concerning on the side of Optic. So TSM manages to win a fight, basically cancels out the Optic Baron. The Baron falls off, but Optic is not even able to get the mid lane outer turret out of it, which is almost a death sentence for Optic at this point. They need that pressure, they needed that early game strength, and it just hasn't happened for them. TSM is now at a stage of the game where they can just extend. They can really stop Optic from doing much of anything, with the ability of the now level 11 Galio to come in and ultimate onto a Optic that is trying to invade aggressively into the TSM jungle. And this game is just going to be, it's very difficult for Optic to pressure their advantage anywhere. We're seeing them starting to lose the 4 versus 4. Because again, the Ezreal is scaling up, the Corki is scaling up, the Draven is falling off with his QSS for the 0cc on TSM. And it's just going to be difficult. Right here, we're going to see Crown make a very aggressive play onto Dokla, or onto Broken Blade. This is unnecessary on a number of fronts. If you're looking at this from the side of Optic, you really just watched TSM say, okay, we are going to make a play onto Broken Blade and see the mid lane turret. If Crown... So Crown is in the Fog of War, and I think TSM to some extent is expecting him to try and make that rotation. So TSM is, if Crown just sits in the Fog of War, TSM is to some extent forced to rotate additional people bot side to answer the Aurelia split push, at which point the mid turret falls. TSM Optic, yes, maybe they lose Aurelia, but they pick up 2 towers in exchange. However, they go over aggressive when they don't need to go over aggressive, again, and they're going to lose 2 members instead of just 1. They're going to get 1 turret instead of 2, and they're going to lose the Baron here. Yes, this is technically a 50-50, but the burst damage on TSM, the level advantage for Acadian, makes it not really a feasible, or it makes it a not likely contest from the side of Optic. It is, in that situation, the Baron is maybe 80% TSM's, which at this point in the game is, I think, a risk you're willing to take as TSM. Game continues. We don't need to watch this replay. Game continues, and Optic now have absolutely 0 forward vision. They are down a Baron buff. They are playing a team that has inferior scaling. We are at the 31-minute point where Optic is pretty much starting to just be strictly weaker in every situation except for the top lane 1v1. And that top lane 1v1 isn't useful when there's a Baron buff on Optic, and it isn't useful when the lanes are this shoved. Corki with the package and Galio ult and Ezreal ult can break that 1v1 really, really easily when the lanes are this close together. So, at this point, the game is pretty much over. There's very little that Optic is going to be able to do unless TSM makes some serious mistakes and Bjergsen gets burst down by the Aurelia LeBlanc combined dive. But that's not an outcome that I would expect. I would expect TSM is able to put their tanks in the right place, and Bjergsen especially, I would expect is capable of knowing where his vision is and knowing where he can safely stand to be away from the Optic aggression. And this is, see the attempt onto Bjergsen. Sven is going to get chunked out because he is standing in not necessarily the right place, but a chunk on Sven is a lot less valuable than a chunk on Bjergsen. Sven is doing less DPS, and Sven is able to contribute to a team fight more impactfully from a longer range. So a chunk onto Sven doesn't necessarily force him out of the team fight. Yes, he will probably not be able to auto attack as much, but he can still throw WQs into a fight, which is just more impactful than anything than Bjergsen sitting in the side throwing R's, because he's too low health to get into range to do much of anything else. On top of that, Sven has lifesteal and Bjergsen doesn't. So yes, it's solid from Crown to get a chunk out of somebody in that situation, but it's not the person you want a chunk out of. And it's ultimately ineffective. TSM, after picking up the 2 inhibitors, is able to reset, rotate topside, pressure as 5 onto the top lane turret. And having the other 2 inhibitors down means that TSM can basically avoid this top lane 1v1 entirely. The ideal strategy in this situation is to let the two side waves push up on their own, force Aurelia to... Aurelia is forced to be bot lane anyway because of the inhibitors. And now you can 5v4 in the top lane. Even if Aurelia is able to come, TSM's 5 versus 5 is just so incredibly stronger than Optics right now that there's pretty much nothing they're able to do at this point. Optics should make some sort of desperation play, just because if they don't, they will outright lose. But I would not expect that sort of play to be successful by any stretch, now that the game has reached this point. I'm going to see Bjergsen aggressively pushing in the mid lane, leaving the bot lane empty. I'm not a fan of this. If you're TSM, you really want the mid lane and bot lane waves to be crashing at the same time, and they had the opportunity to do that if that earlier wave in the mid lane had been kind of allowed to let sit rather than Bjergsen coming in and pushing it out as aggressively. However, they do pretty much just stall until a new top and bot lane wave comes in, which then enables them to push down this turret. Optic is now forced to back off and clear the wave on their Nexus turret while TSM clears out this inhibitor. And now with triple inhibs, TSM is free to wait until the next round of waves comes in, or they can reset buy, because I'm sure they have at least some amount of gold, and move towards one of the global objectives. The Elder Drake is a pretty viable option for them right here. It should be clear to TSM that with Optic having been forced into their base for so long, and with the triple inhibitors, there's no way that Optic can get any sort of forward vision or get any sort of contest onto one of these neutral objectives. Unfortunately, Bjergsen is just God knows where on the side of TSM. And he's going to get chunked to some extent, forced to run off. Sure, he gets Optic to walk top lane and see the Elder Drake. They couldn't contest the Elder Drake anyway. There is no reason for Bjergsen to be topside at all, really. He should have remained with his team. There's also no reason for Sven to just be running it down mid. This would be much cleaner if it were just a TSM concerted effort. Burn down the Elder Drake. You have double mountains. You have 280 carries. Move into the TSM red side jungle. Move into the Optic red side jungle. Clear out their vision. Burn down the Baron buff, which you do incredibly quickly, and in a way that Optic cannot contest because of the triple inhibitors, and then just waltz into the Optic base with your double buff. TSM wandering around a bit chaotically and randomly, but they do eventually kind of get the memo and pick up the global objectives, and they are going to be able to just kind of waltz right into Optic's base and end the game without Optic having really any say in it. So, looking back on this game, it was mostly defined by Optic picking a vastly superior early game team composition that is able to very easily and very successfully pressure down all 3 lanes at once, and use that to get aggressive early vision and make aggressive invades into the TSM jungle, to then either catch them in rotation, track Acadian to let your lanes win further, and or set up aggressive dives into the bot lane or top lane. Optic bungles a few plays and kind of completely fails to make really much of a solid attempt at any of that aggressive vision. They pick a defensive Draven lane for some unknown reason, and they start playing like they are behind well before they actually are. And as a result, they pretty much give up for free any real opportunity that they had to press this huge advantage that they had in all of the lanes. And over time, that advantage kind of slowly disappeared until TSM was able to outscale and bring their teamfight power to bear, and Optic just kind of fell apart. All in all, kind of a step down from Optic after their other game this weekend, and really kind of disappointing out of them. I expected better. TSM, on the other hand, I am happy to see them playing scaling compositions against the teams they're confident against. And they did make some mistakes. They had a few moments in the late game where they were kind of running around with no real concept of what they were doing. They got baited into thinking they were more ahead than they were and took that over aggressive Drake fight, which cost them the Baron and kind of got Optic back into that game. But overall, really solid looking game from TSM that I was really happy to see. So that was TSM versus Optic. Hope you enjoyed. I'm John Valentine. Thanks for watching.